The RPA has changed again, so let's fill it out together. Hey guys, it's Brittany, a real estate agent, coach, and investor, and today I'm going to show you step-by-step how to walk through and fill out the California Residential Purchase Agreement, or the RPA. Before we jump in, a little disclaimer. I am not a trainer. I just am showing you how I would walk through it and how I would fill it out. I also want to remind you that you want to make sure to read through this entire document. I know it's long, but you want to read every single word and understand it before you're ever putting it in front of your clients. So make sure that you're reading through this. But once you do that, let's jump in and really fill this out. So the first thing you're going to notice is that this is actually not the RPA. This first page on the form is called the AD, the Agency Relationship Disclosure. And this is basically talking about if you're the buyer's agent, you are representing the buyer for the sale of this transaction. Maybe you are a dual agent, whatever it is, but you are agreeing to represent the buyer or the seller on this transaction. So the first place we're going to go is we're going to see that there are some blanks down here for the buyer. Now we're going to talk about representing the buyer because this is an RPA, and if you're filling out a purchase agreement, you are representing a buyer. So you'll see that there are some places that are already filled out for me, and that's because I have completed it on my templates. I highly recommend you go into your templates and you fill this out ahead of time, just for the things that are very common and always going to be needed. So you can see here that I have my brokerage, my name, and then the license numbers. So I'm gonna write in here, I'm gonna start filling this out. And Mickey Mouse is gonna be buying with his partner, Minnie Mouse. And now what we're going to notice is every time it asks for buyer 1 or buyer 2, Mickey and Minnie are going to be written in here. So let's keep going and see how we can fill this out. All of this is going to be stuff that you need to read through, but you can see here that this is already filled out. This is the possible representation of more than one buyer. Read through that. Now, here's the first time we have the buyer, we have us, and now we have to fill out the brokerage information. You can find all this brokerage information on the MLS. It's going to have the seller's brokerage information, their DRE, their name, everything's going to be on the MLS. But I want to show you a shortcut. So if we save this and we go back to the main page, in your transaction, you're going to see this little icon, the MLS Connect. And if we go into it, I'm going to say CA MLS because that's my main MLS. There's already something in here, so I'm going to go ahead and use this one. I'm going to say include a property photo. Now, if you don't have your MLS listing ID, you just go to the MLS and it's the MLS number. So you just copy and paste it in here. Now let's see what it finds. All right, so we have one here. I'm just going to use this as an example. It's going to say it's going to replace the existing data. Yes, let's go ahead and do that. And now let's jump back into the RPA. So now let's scroll down. We still have all of our information here. Still have the same information, but what you'll see is now all of this information is filled out. So now we don't have to worry about filling this out. We want to confirm to make sure it's right, but I'm just going to assume that it's right for our purposes. It already has the address filled out, so let's keep it going. This is an insurance advisory. We're still not to the RPA. Here we go. Now we're to the RPA, the California Residential Purchase Agreement. And you can see that a lot of this has been filled out because we connected it through the MLS and because I have a lot of this filled out through my templates already. So again, I recommend filling out some of these things that are always going to be the case in your templates. So the first thing you want to make sure you do is put your date prepared. Now, when we do our date prepared, you want to make sure that this is the date that you're actually preparing it. It doesn't matter the date that it's signed. When you go back and forth with counter offers and things like that, the date that it's signed and the final agreement date, that's going to be when your timelines begin. But all of your subsequent addendums and all the other forms that say this is pursuant to the RPA dated, this is the date prepared. So this is the date you want to make sure you have. So now we have all of this. One of the things that a lot of people forget to check off is this who's representing who. And so this is saying this is representing the seller. I always have this marked off in my templates. You can change this if it's a dual agency. So if, for instance, both of us were represented by Keller Williams, West Ventura County, that would be dual agent. It's not that it's the agent, it's that it's the brokerage representing both. So you don't have to worry about this for this one because it's two different ones. So let's cancel that. And now it's going to be the seller is representing them and the buyer is being represented by them. So now we're going to go down and we're going to start filling out purchase price. So let's just throw some numbers in here. We're going to say $500,000. And if this is an all cash offer, we would check this box. But because we're going to do a loan just for this example, we're going to leave this blank. Now, close of escrow, this is whatever your close of escrow date is. Typically, it's 30 days, 45 days. If you want to go sooner, like a 21-day close, you want to talk to the lender to make sure that that can happen. And if you are close to a holiday or you want to make sure that things are lining up just right, you want to actually put a specific date of when you want to close. So if you wanted it to be about a month, you could do the 31st, but keep in mind that's month end. And so sometimes that gets really busy. So maybe we want to do it the day before or close on a Monday. What we always recommend is that you don't close on a Friday because there's a lot of stuff that goes on at the end of the transaction, close to the close. You're getting funded, you're getting notarized, you're getting, you have to record. All of this stuff has to happen. And sometimes you can't do certain things on the same day. So it's very easy for things to get pushed back. And if you're closing on a Friday, then it has to be pushed back to the following business day. So at the earliest, it's going to be Monday. If there's any kind of a holiday, it's going to be pushed back even further. So I always try and close on a Wednesday if possible, just that gives us a little bit of cushion. So I want to make sure that I'm closing on a Wednesday or even Tuesday. I really don't want to close on a Friday. Or you can just put 30 days, 21 days, whatever that is in here. Now, here we see expiration of offer is the default is 3 calendar days after all buyer signatures. So if you're okay with this, you're just going to leave this blank. Now, you want to keep in mind that if you are putting a date in here, if you are saying we want this signed within 24 hours, you always have to keep in mind that this is going to make your offer less strong. And so you always have to think about what is the market that we're in? Is it going to be looked at negatively that we're saying that we're going to do a 24-hour expiration? If the agent has a bunch of other offers on the home, then that might not be the best case. That might be something that you want to just say 3 days, let us know when you get your chance. But if you know that you are in a good position to be able to request that 24-hour turnaround, that's when you would do that. You just want to make sure you know exactly what's going on. Now we're going to go to the initial deposit. This is generally between 1% and 3% of your purchase price. And the reason we don't go higher than that is because by law, the seller can only collect up to 3%. Now, what this is a deposit, or maybe your EMD, if you've heard that, earnest money deposit. This is basically telling your seller that you are very serious, that your buyer is really serious, they're going to make this happen. What this says is that if they decide to cancel and they've removed the contingencies, the seller is going to be able to keep this money. Now, keep in mind that the RPA is written to protect the buyer because the buyer is the one at risk. At the end of all of this, if everybody cancels and everything goes to poop, the buyer is the one out the money. The seller still has their house. So the RPA is really written to protect the buyer, and all of these contingencies that we'll say are giving that out to the buyer to be able to still collect their earnest money deposit or their EMD. So we typically do between 1% and 3%, depending on your area, depending on what that looks like for you. You want to just do whatever is common. In my area, it's common to do 3%. So 3% of this would be, $15,000. And you can see it automatically does the math. So I can double check to make sure I'm right. And then over here, this is additional terms. So this says that they're going to submit a deposit of $15,000 within 3 business days Or if you want to change that, so maybe it's 7 days or whatever. Again, anytime you change this, it's going to make your offer less strong. It's not going to be as clean. And so you want to make sure you really know what you're doing. And then the default is acceptance by wire transfer. So, or within 3 business days after acceptance by wire transfer. So that means it's not a cashier's check. It's not a personal check. It's by wire transfer. This is common. It's typical. A lot of escrow companies don't even allow cashier's checks anymore. So this is best practice. So you just leave this blank and it is what it is. This is something though, when you do your buyer consultation, this is something that I always tell my buyers to be aware of, because buyers don't realize that it's not just the down payment that they're putting down. This goes toward their down payment, but they have to put this down up front. So it's 3 days after everything is agreed to. So it's really important that you let your buyer know that ahead of time, because sometimes they don't realize that they're going to have to give $15,000 right away. And maybe those funds aren't available or whatever the case may be. So you just want to make sure that they're very clear on that. Now, this increased deposit is not used very often. So for the most part, we're going to leave it blank. This would be used in the instance that, let's just say you're giving a 1% EMD, but you're going to give an additional 1% of a non-refundable deposit, so that this is really telling the seller, hey, we want this house and we are willing to put our money where our mouth is and give you something that's non-refundable. This is totally negotiable. You can change this, and it's very uncommon. So don't do this unless you know what you're doing. Now, here's where we get to the loan amount. So in the loan amount, this is saying this is going to be a first position loan. Let's just say our clients are putting 20% down. And so what we would do is we would calculate what is 80% of 500,000. So that is 400,000. And again, it does the math for us so we can double check and make sure there's anything that we need to do. Now, it also will do the balance of the down payment here. So it also calculates everything for you. So you can double check the math here. Now, remember what I said, this $15,000, your earnest money deposit, goes toward your down payment. So 20% of 500,000 is 100,000, but the balance of the down payment is 85,000 because they've already put $15,000 down. Hope you're tracking with me. Now, the rest of this, again, the default is that it's going to be conventional unless something else is checked. So let's just say, because I want to show you something, that we're going to do an FHA. Okay, so if I click on FHA, it's automatically going to add this form over here, this clause. And so this is going to show up down at the bottom of our document. But anytime you check some of these boxes and it says that these forms are attached, it's going to add it over here if you're using zip forms. So going back to this section, there are a couple of other things that you can change. I tend not to put anything in here because, again, anytime you put anything in here, it's just another out for your buyer, and it makes it so that it's not as clean of an offer. But you could say, you know, if they're really tight on their margins, you could say that their interest rate is not to exceed 7.5, let's just say, because if it went up 7.5, if it went up to that, then your buyer couldn't afford it and they have to opt out, whatever it is. So you could put that. I tend not to do it just because, like I said, I feel like it's a cleaner offer if I don't put anything like that. Additional finance, again, this is not super common. This is what was seen back when people were getting the 80% loans, and then they were getting a loan for the additional 20% so that they would have 100% loan. We don't see that as much anymore, thankfully. And so, but that's where we would put something like that. So the occupancy type is primary is the default, or you can put secondary or investment. But for our case today, we're just going to leave it at primary. Now, if we keep going down, you can say there is a seller credit, if any, to the buyer. And so this is where if you're asking for closing costs, a percentage, anything like that, you would put that in. Now, this is not Super common in a strong seller's market, because in a strong seller's market, the seller is the one in the driver's seat. And so you're not asking for any kind of credits up front. However, as things shift and we get closer to a buyer's market, and we are still in a seller's market, by the way, but as things shift, it's more and more likely that we're seeing a lot of these seller credits and requests for credits. A lot of times what you'll see is that somebody will offer full price or over, but they'll request a credit. And the reason for that is because now the buyer gets that to be able to pay for closing costs or things like that. So this is more common as the market shifts, but again, it's case by case. We're definitely not in a buyer's market yet. Now, if you wanted to do additional finance terms, that would be here, but there is another place to do other terms. So anything that's not actual finance related, we're going to put that in other terms. This form is one of the newer forms where we are saying the seller agrees to pay the obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement. So this is how we are going to request compensation. We have to have this separate agreement. And basically what we're saying is the buyer has agreed to pay me X. So what we're asking for is for the seller to pay that. The rest of this, the verification, this is basically saying that it is attached to the offer. So anytime when you see in the MLS that they're requesting proof of funds and the pre-approval and all of that, the default in your offer is that you're attaching it anyway. So you want to make sure that you have proof of funds, that you have the pre-approval, that you have everything so that you can send it with the offer. If you don't want to send it with the offer, you can check these boxes. Again, it makes for not as clean of an offer and not as strong of an offer. Verification of any kind of funds. So that is down payment, if they're paying all cash, anything that they're going to need to bring cash to the table for, you want to have proof of funds for that. And then verification of loan application. A pre-qualification is not something you want. A pre-qualification is basically them talking to the lender saying, this is how much I make, this is my credit score. No, that is not enough. You want at bare minimum a pre-approval. With a pre-approval, this is the lender checking their credit score, checking their income. They're going a little bit more in depth than what they would do with a pre-qualification. Now, the fully underwritten pre-approval is really the top notch. When you see in the MLS that listing agents are requesting a DU, that stands for desktop underwriting. And that's exactly what this is, a fully underwritten pre-approval. This is the cream of the crop. And if you can get your client to get this, if you can get your lender to give you this, that's really where it's at. So make sure that you at minimum have a pre-approval, and hopefully you have a fully underwritten pre-approval. Now, verification of property, that's going to be 5 days prior to close of escrow. So that is your final walkthrough. And again, I'm leaving this as a default. The assignment request, that's if like you're a wholesaler and you're going to sell it to somebody else before it ever comes in your name. You're basically saying you have 17 days to do that. Now, here's where we have our contingencies. And the default for all of our contingencies is 17 days. The default for the loan contingency being 17 days, this is saying that we are going to remove our loan contingency after 17 days. Now, all of our contingencies require a proactive removal. They don't expire. So you want to either send a contingency removal or an extension, or if the listing agent isn't requesting it, you're good to go. But you want to make sure that all of these timelines are good for you. So of course, if you are waiving the loan contingency, this is where you would put it. If you're doing cash, you waive the loan contingency, waive the appraisal contingency. If you are not paying with cash, you better make sure your client is very well qualified before removing any kind of loan or appraisal contingency. Basically meaning they have the cash in the bank to actually pay this all in full. They're just choosing to get a loan. You don't want to mess with this loan contingency, because if anything happens, any hiccups, you are now basically making your client walk away from their earnest money deposit, and you don't want that. So we are not removing our loan contingency or our appraisal contingency. What we can do is we can shorten these timelines. So especially your appraisal contingency, this gets shortened all the time. 14 days is really common. Now, what you want to make sure of is that your buyer understands that if you do shorten it, they are at risk of paying for a rush appraisal. This doesn't always happen. It's not always the case, but if they do shorten it too much, then they're going to have to pay for a rush. And again, that's money out of their pocket. This appraisal contingency says it's based upon an appraised value at the minimum of purchase price, or you can raise that or lower that however you want. So if you say, we're going to offer $100,000 over, and that's going to be the purchase price. But if you write this in saying, well, we're offering this much, but it has to appraise at the asking price, which is $100,000 less. That's where you're going to write this stuff in. Investigation of property, these are your inspection contingencies. I almost always shorten that to 10 days because that shows your seller that you are serious and that you're going to move quickly. And you always can get inspections done within that 10-day period for the most part. Insurance is a new one that they just added. So this insurance is saying that if your buyer cannot get insurance or doesn't approve of the cost of insurance or anything like that, that is grounds for your buyer being able to pull out. And this is a good addition, in my opinion, because insurance can be very prohibitive in California right now. There are tons of insurance companies that are pulling out of California, not even grandfathering in some of their current clients. And so having this insurance contingency is really important. And then review of seller documents, review of title, all of this can stay 17 days. If you shorten some of these, some people say just shorten all of them, but I think it's fine to leave it. This is also a new one. They added review of leased or liened items, example, solar panels or propane tanks. So this is really good because if your client is trying to get the solar lease transferred to them and they're not able to get that, then this gives them another out. So 17 days is a good amount of time to get all this stuff figured out. And if you can't get any of this stuff done in 17 days, you can always request an extension. Now, possession, this is, the default is upon notice of recordation, meaning as soon as it's recorded. So it used to be that the default was at 6 p.m. the day of, but they changed that on the last update of the RPA. So now as soon as it's recorded, that's when you can manage the exchange of keys and getting your buyer keys and the celebration and all of that. So this is a default, and I would just leave it at this unless you're doing a seller in possession or something along those lines. And then, of course, seller occupied or vacant. This would be different situations. Now, these are documents, fees, and compliance, and it tells you the time for performance. Again, I just leave this all blank because the default is fine for these. And then we get to items included and excluded. These are things that I have in my templates, which is why it's already filled out. Of course, most of the time, dishwasher, stove, that's definitely going to be included. Microwave if it's built in, but we want to mark it just for clarity purposes. Video, doorbell, security camera, all of that, same kind of thing. If it's built in, if it's affixed to the property, then it usually is included, but we want to just be clear. Refrigerator is something that's usually negotiable, and so it's something that I pretty much always ask for unless they're specifically saying that it's not included. Same thing for washer dryer. I want to see if my buyer wants it, because sometimes the buyers don't want it. Sometimes the buyers are like, I have my own that are better. I don't want to deal with the hassle of trying to get it out. So we want to see what the buyers are requesting. And then now we get down to the allocation of costs. So for pretty much all of these, you're going to have to say who pays for what. Is it the buyer, is it the seller, or is it both? As you look down and see, most of these are paid by the seller. The idea is that the seller is paying for these things because they go with the property. And so if something falls out with the buyer, the seller is still going to have all these documents. If your buyer wants to do a home inspection, termite inspection, you don't have to write this stuff in. However, if it's a VA buyer and it's required to do a termite inspection, for instance, then you might want to write in the termite inspection and Section 1 clearance, which would probably be down here, termite and Section 1 clearance, because that is what is required for close of escrow for a VA. But we're doing conventional, actually I forgot, we're doing a VA or FHA. Anyway, we're not going to worry about that. So the first thing here, anytime it says provided by, you want to check the box and say who your preference is, unless the seller has a preference. But the seller's paying for this, this optional wildfire disclosure report. This is going to be it's optional. So it totally depends on the property and the situation. And usually I'm going to leave it blank unless we're in a high fire zone, and then we're going to request it. All of these smoke alarms, government required point of sale, corrective remedial actions. I'm going to ask the seller to pay for all of this always. And then if they want to counter it out, they can. Escrow fees. I always have my escrow company in here. This is my preferred escrow. If the seller has requested a specific escrow and title, then I'm going to use what they requested, because again, it makes for a stronger offer. But if they don't request anything, then I'm going to be putting mine in. And for escrow, it's typical for each to pay their own. Title is usually the seller, and so usually I put choice of seller. County and city transfer taxes, seller, and then down here, if there's any HOA, it's going to be usually the seller, but if it's not an HOA, I'm not going to fill this out. And then home warranty, we're going to do, the seller usually pays for that. Even in a strong seller's market, it is very common for the seller to pay for it. But this is something that is totally optional. Remember, everything's negotiable in this. So if the buyer really wants to get their offer accepted, this might be something that they say, hey, the buyer is going to pay for the home warranty plan. And then of course, you talk to your home warranty people and see how much it is, but you always want to put a cost in here. It says, if seller or both is checked, the seller's cost is not to exceed a certain amount. And so it's not to exceed $600. So the buyer gets to choose, as it shows here. However, the seller's cost is not to exceed this much money. So the buyer can still choose to upgrade. The buyer can choose to do whatever they want, but the seller is not going to pay any more than this. Now, if we wanted to do an escalation clause or something like that, it would be here in other terms. If you wanted to do an escalation clause, for instance, you would write in purchase price to be $5,000 higher than next verified highest offer up to a certain price point. There are pros and cons to doing this. Everybody's going to have an opinion when it comes to this. You decide what you want to do, but if you're going to write it in, this is where you would write it. And now all of this is going to be, if it's a unique kind of situation like tenant occupied property, probate, manufactured, all of this kind of stuff, you would use these addenda. These right here are automatically checked and you can't uncheck them. So you just leave that there and we keep moving on. Now, I didn't mention this, but if you notice that up here, there are numbers in almost all of these boxes. And basically what this does is it is referencing down below. So if you have questions on HOA fee for preparing disclosures, it's going to be in 11L2. So then we go down to 11. All right, we're at 11, and then we're going to go to L. Here's L2. Here is the explanation of that. So all of this is just an explanation of what's above. So if you have questions on it, this is where you're going to find the answer. If your client has questions about what you're filling out in the grid, this is where they find the answer. All right, so we're going to keep going down because you're going to read through this on your own and make sure you know what this all says and you understand it. It has, again, the expiration of offer, but it was already written in up top. This is if they're entity buyers, LLC, trust, that kind of thing. You're going to fill this out. Ours are just regular buyers. So we're going to just put it here and they're going to sign. Then the seller is either going to say, we accepted this offer by signing it, we agree to it, or we're going to do a seller counter offer, or we're going to agree that it's a backup offer addendum. And then if the seller is an entity, then that's what's going to be filled out there. And then here's the real estate broker section. So this confirms the offer of compensation. So it's saying the seller's broker agrees to pay the buyer's broker, and buyer broker agrees to accept out of seller's proceeds in escrow the compensation specified in the form CBC. So that's a form that is you want to add onto that. These, again, this is the information that's already in my templates. So you want to make sure that yours is in your templates and ready to go. This was pulled over from that MLS Connect. So we're good. We just want to confirm that it's correct. This escrow information gets written in later. Then we have more for the buyers to read and sign. And here is that FHA VA amendatory clause. This is what we added on over here. So you can see it doesn't have a date, but it says this is an addendum to the purchase agreement dated 7/3. So remember, it's not the date of the signatures, it's the date of the purchase agreement. And then the property, and this is saying set forth the appraised value of the property is not less than the purchase price. And all of this is already filled out. So we're good to go. And we come to the end. Well, I hope that helped. And remember, if you are a real estate agent and you want to learn more about coaching, reach out to me and schedule a call in the link below, because I would love to talk to you about your business. And if you're a newer agent, be sure to like and subscribe, because we have big plans for the future. So make sure that you're following along, because you're going to want to hear this. And for everyone else, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.